There was a time when 35 cents bought you a pound of chicken, and one pot turned that into a meal that meant one thing: survival. Today we're bringing back 15 of those one-pot meals that fed families and now feed someone eating alone at a kitchen table that once held more than one plate. Before we get into it, hit subscribe, because these aren't the recipes floating around on Facebook groups, TikTok, or Pinterest boards. These are the plain, honest versions, the way they were cooked. Let's start with the one that never needed a recipe card at all: Swiss steak skillet. This wasn't steak in the way we think of steak today. It was a tougher cut, round steak usually, pounded flat with the edge of a plate or the back of a spoon until the fibers broke down. Floured, browned hard in the same skillet it would finish in, then covered in tomatoes, onions, and just enough water to come halfway up the meat. Potatoes went in around it, whole or halved, right into that same liquid. The whole thing sat on low heat for close to 2 hours. No oven required, no second pan for the potatoes. The gravy built itself out of the flour dredge and the tomato juice, thickening slowly while the meat went from tough to something a fork could pull apart on its own. A pound of round steak ran about 60 cents in 1955. It covered 2 full dinners with potatoes already built into the dish. That's not a garnish. That's the whole dinner, cooked in one place, at one time, with one pan to wash. 14. Chicken fricassee. This one gets confused with regular chicken soup, and it isn't the same thing. Fricassee starts with the chicken browned first, not simmered raw. That browning step is what gives the final broth its color and its depth. Once the chicken had a crust on it, it went back into the pot with carrots, onion, and just enough broth to cover, and it cooked slow until the meat fell off the bone on its own. Near the end, a little flour and cream got stirred straight into that same broth, thickening it into something closer to a gravy than a soup. Not thin, not watery, something you'd eat with a spoon and still call a real meal. A whole chicken in 1958 cost about $1 and fed a table for 2 days. Fricassee wasn't a lesser version of a roast chicken dinner. It was the smarter one. 13. Goulash skillet. Not the Hungarian original, the American kitchen version. Ground beef browned first, then macaroni added dry, along with tomato sauce and just enough water to cook the pasta through without ever draining a pot of noodles separately. That's the detail that made it a one-pot meal instead of a two-pot meal. The pasta cooked in the sauce itself, which meant the starch from the noodles thickened the whole dish as it went, instead of watering it down. Ground beef in 1960 ran about 45 cents a pound. A single pound, mixed with a box of macaroni worth a dime, covered dinner with enough left for the next day. A single skillet, under $1, and the starch from the noodles did more seasoning work than most people give it credit for. Ham hock and bean pot. This one took planning, and it rewarded patience in a way fast food never will. Dry beans soaked overnight, then went into the pot the next morning with a ham hock, an onion, and water to cover. From there it was hours on low heat, no stirring required, no attention beyond an occasional check. The ham hock did the heavy lifting. As it cooked down, it released fat and salt slowly into the beans, seasoning the whole pot from the inside instead of from a shaker. By the time it was ready, the beans had gone soft enough to mash against the roof of your mouth, and the broth around them had turned thick and dark. A ham hock cost next to nothing, usually under 30 cents, because it was considered a scrap cut. That scrap cut seasoned an entire pot of beans that lasted the better part of a week. Nothing about that pot was wasted. Not the hock, not the thyme, not the broth left at the bottom. 11. Split pea and ham. Split peas didn't need soaking the way dry beans did, which made this one of the faster pots on this list, despite how thick and hearty it ended up. Peas, a leftover ham bone or hock, carrots, and onion, all into the same pot. As the peas cooked down, they broke apart completely, turning the whole pot into a thick, almost porridge-like base, with the ham distributed all through it instead of sitting on top. There was no separating the protein from the starch in this dish. It was one texture, one flavor, all the way through. A bag of split peas in the 1950s cost about 15 cents and made enough for 2 full dinners out of one pot. This is a meal built entirely around not letting a ham bone go to waste, and it still holds up. 10. Kielbasa and cabbage skillet. Sliced kielbasa browned first in its own fat, right in the skillet, no oil needed. Cabbage went in next, cut into thick wedges, along with sliced potatoes, straight into that same rendered fat. A splash of water or broth, a lid on top, and the whole thing steamed down together until the cabbage went soft and sweet, and the potatoes finished cooking in the sausage drippings. The fat from the kielbasa is what made this work. It seasoned the cabbage and the potatoes without a single extra ingredient added for flavor. Nothing about this recipe asked for butter or oil because the sausage already brought both. A ring of kielbasa cost about 50 cents in 1962 and stretched across an entire skillet meal with enough left over for the next night.
My husband doesn't really love cabbage, but he loves this easy skillet dish.
Cabbage has a bad reputation today. It didn't earn that reputation in this dish. Beef and barley pot. Barley doesn't get much attention anymore, and that's a loss, because it does something rice can't. It thickens a pot as it cooks, releasing starch slowly the way rice never does, which means the broth around it gets richer the longer it sits instead of thinner. Beef chunks browned first, then barley, carrots, and onion went in with enough water to cover everything by an inch. Low heat, a lid on, and an hour and a half later, the barley had swelled to double its size and the broth had turned into something closer to a stew than a soup. A pound of stew beef in 1959 ran about 65 cents. Combined with a cup of barley worth a nickel, that pot ran for days on under $1 total. That math doesn't exist in a kitchen anymore, and it's worth remembering that it once did. 8. Beef and cabbage skillet. Ground beef browned first, broken up small in the pan. Cabbage shredded and added straight on top of the meat, no separate cooking step. Rice went in dry, along with tomato juice or a can of tomatoes. Enough liquid to cook the rice directly in the pan alongside everything else. A lid on, low heat, and 25 minutes later the rice had absorbed the liquid, the cabbage had gone tender, and the whole dish held together as one texture. This wasn't a recipe that needed measuring. A pound of beef, half a head of cabbage, a cup of rice. Whatever proportions worked for the pot on hand. It's one of the plainest meals on this list, and proof that plain was never the same thing as boring. Pork and sauerkraut. Pork shoulder or chops, browned first for color, then covered in sauerkraut straight from the jar, juice and all. Potatoes went in whole around the meat, nestled right into the sauerkraut itself. A lid on, low heat, and 2 hours later the pork had gone fork tender, and the potatoes had soaked up the tang of the kraut the entire time they cooked. The sauerkraut juice did something a plain broth never could. It tenderized the meat with acid instead of just heat, which meant a tougher, cheaper cut of pork came out just as soft as an expensive one. Pork shoulder in 1957 cost about 35 cents a pound, less than half the price of a chop. That price gap is exactly why this dish existed, and exactly why it worked as well as it did. Scratch pot chili. No packet of seasoning, no pre-made blend. Chili powder, cumin, and a little paprika measured by hand, straight into the pot with browned ground beef, kidney beans, and crushed tomatoes. The difference between this and a packet version is depth. Ground spices bloomed in the fat left from browning the beef, which pulled out flavor that a pre-made mix, added at the end, never manages to reach. This chili simmered for at least an hour, sometimes longer, because the flavor needed that time to build. A pound of beef, a can of beans, a can of tomatoes, and a handful of spices came to about 70 cents total in 1961 and carried across 2 nights on its own. The packet version saves 5 minutes. It never once matched the flavor of the version built from scratch. 5. Sausage and pepper skillet. Sliced sausage browned first. Peppers and onions added straight into that same fat. Cooked down until soft and slightly caramelized at the edges. Rice went in last, dry, with a can of tomatoes and enough water to cook it through, right there in the same pan as everything else. This dish had a brightness the others on this list didn't. The peppers gave it a sweetness that cut through the richness of the sausage, and the rice picked up both flavors as it cooked, so every spoonful carried a little of everything. A pack of Italian sausage in 1963 cost about 60 cents and made a full skillet meal with rice already built in, no side dish required. It's proof that a one-pot meal didn't have to be heavy to be filling. Lentil and ham. Lentils cook faster than almost anything else on this list, which made this one of the quickest pots to get on the table, despite tasting like it's simmered all day. Lentils, diced ham, carrots, and onion all into the pot together, covered with water, and simmered for about 40 minutes until the lentils broke down soft. The ham did double duty here, seasoning the broth and providing the protein at the same time, which meant nothing extra needed to be added. No bouillon, no salt beyond what the ham already carried. A bag of lentils cost about 12 cents in 1960. Combined with diced ham, that pot ran the whole week for under $1 total. This is one of the fastest meals on the list to make, and one of the slowest to actually eat through. 3. Beef and rice skillet. Ground beef browned in the skillet first, onion added in next, then rice poured in dry, right on top of the meat. Beef broth went in last, enough to cover the rice by about ½ an inch, and a lid went on until the rice had absorbed every bit of that liquid. The rice cooked directly in the beef fat and broth, which meant every grain carried flavor all the way through instead of sitting bland under a sauce. There was no separating the rice from the meat in this dish. They cooked as one thing. A pound of ground beef and a cup of rice came to under 60 cents combined in 1962 and made enough for several full plates across a few days. Simple, but simple was never the same thing as bland in this kitchen. 2. Cabbage roll skillet. No rolling. Traditional cabbage rolls take hours, rolling individual leaves around meat and rice one at a time. This version skipped the rolling entirely. Chopped cabbage, ground beef, rice, and tomato all went into the same pan at the same time, cooked down together until the cabbage softened and the rice finished cooking in the tomato liquid. Every flavor of a traditional cabbage roll ended up in this pan, without the hour of rolling that came before it. The texture was different, looser, more like a hash than individual rolls, but the taste held up completely. A head of cabbage in 1959 cost about 10 cents. Combined with a pound of beef and a cup of rice, the whole skillet came to under $1 and lasted several dinners. Sometimes the shortcut wasn't a downgrade. Sometimes it was just a smarter version of the same idea. Smothered chicken and rice. Chicken pieces browned first, skinned down, until the fat rendered out into the pan. That fat never got poured off. Onion went in next, cooked right in the drippings. Then rice poured in dry and broth added on top of all of it, enough to cover the rice completely. A lid went on, heat went low, and the rice cooked directly in that seasoned broth, while the chicken finished cooking on top of it, the juices from the meat dripping straight down into the rice the entire time. By the time it came off the stove, the rice at the bottom had turned golden and slightly crisp against the pan, and the chicken on top had gone fall apart tender. Nothing about this dish needed a side. A whole cut-up chicken and a cup of rice cost under $1 total in 1958, and there wasn't a single dish left over to wash beyond the pot itself. This is the one that shows exactly what a one-pot meal was supposed to do. Feed a table completely out of one vessel with nothing wasted and nothing left half-finished. Not one of these needed a second pan to be a full dinner. That wasn't a limitation back then. It was a skill. Cooking everything together in the right order, in the same fat, in the same liquid, so that every ingredient seasoned the next one, instead of sitting next to it on a plate, untouched by anything around it. Packaged meals changed that. A pan for the meat, a separate box for the side, and the one-pot method got treated as a shortcut instead of a skill. It was never old-fashioned. It was efficient, and most modern cooking abandoned that on purpose. One pot did more than we've given it credit for. It wasn't a compromise. It was the whole point. Tell us which one of these you'd actually trust yourself to make in one pot. No shortcuts, no extra pan. If this list changed your mind about what one pot can actually do, hit subscribe. We bring back a forgotten collection like this every single week.